Sunday, we're invited to join 7 of the apostles in John's story of Jesus' revelation of himself after the resurrection on the Sea of Tiberias. I've said before, and I believe, that it's dangerous to skim along the top of John's gospel because he had time to reflect and consider every word, every concept, every image. And there's a depth of meaning that we'll get into next year. Because as I was reading, I couldn't help but think, kind of floating near the surface, of the different seasons in Peter's life and a recognition that there are seasons. And not just liturgical seasons as we wake our way through the liturgical year, kind of forced, but along the course of our lives, there are seasons and different moments. And this is the last story of John's gospel. And with it, John very much wants to tell his communities that Peter is in charge, right? That even if John was the beloved, and even if John had so much better things to say, and even if John was close to Jesus, and Peter so oftentimes acted the fool and needed John to get into the courtyard and needed John to find out from Jesus who the betrayer would be, even though Peter denied Jesus 3 times and acted like the hired shepherd, not like the shepherd who loves his sheep. John wanted to say that Peter was given the responsibility by Jesus to shepherd the flock. But in that process, I just found it very helpful to look at the seasons of Peter's life. Because he started a failure, a sinner, on a boat, unable even to catch fish. And the master showed him how to catch fish and invited him, for all of his sinfulness, to follow him. And Peter would regularly be the one who would acclaim with great words. There was a season of his life that was full of words. Words of faith and words of fidelity and words of confidence. He would proclaim Jesus to be the Messiah, and Jesus would call him Rock, right? Peter, not Simon anymore. But there must have been just a little bit of tongue-in-cheek in Jesus' remarks, because he knew that Peter was still without depth and understanding, that immediately Peter would turn and make a fool of himself and encourage Jesus not to embrace the way of love. Peter hadn't learned much yet about love. And we find in his bravado at the Last Supper, we find that Jesus shouldn't wash his feet, like, get out of the way, I'm going to do the washing. That he would never betray him. Like this bravado, that was a time in Jesus' life. And after the resurrection, right, that Jesus comes to them in the upper room and offers them peace. And Peter must have rejoiced at that experience of the risen Lord. But it wasn't everything. Like sometimes we want our spiritual life to be everything. Now I've got it. Now I'm ready to go. Now I have the fullness of what Jesus is teaching me. But Peter didn't, and I don't, and you might not. Because just a week later, Peter decides to go fishing with his friends. And whether that's an allusion to him being finally the fishers of men full circle, or if it's just a circle and he's back where he began, many times we find ourselves back way too close to where we began. And Peter, once again, is unable to catch fish. And Peter, once again, is tired and discouraged as the morning approaches. But then it was night, and when John is remembering the story, nothing good ever happens at night. They didn't catch anything. Not a little minnow between the net and the string. So, once again, Jesus comes to them and invites them. And in this last conversation between Peter and Jesus, he asks him for the faith that matters. He asks him, do you love me? And as only John would remember to tell us, he told Peter that that love for Jesus had to be love for his brothers. And he invites Peter to feed the lambs. And he doesn't do it once or twice, but 3 times. There's so many other questions Jesus could have reasonably asked Peter, that he reasonably could ask me or you. He would have been within his rights to ask Peter if he would promise not to betray him anymore. He would have been, I think, wise to ask Peter if finally he understood why he had to wash his feet. He would have not been wrong to ask Peter what that profession of faith meant, or what he meant in John chapter 6 when he said, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. He could have asked him, but now do you really believe it? He believed it then. It was a different season. But Jesus invites him into the season of love. A season that will take him to the end. A season that will see him through faithfully serving a community. A season that even in fear and doubt at the end, when he's being hunted down, will make him courageous enough to face trial and execution. Not just bravado and bluster, but actually a heart full of love. The kind of love that brings bravery when we're scared. But all of those seasons are important enough to make their way into the Bible. All of those seasons are critical enough in Peter's journey to be part of his story, part of who he is. And maybe Peter hanging upside down on the cross in Rome is who he is through all the seasons. Maybe you'd prefer, having heard the message of Christianity and Jesus' love, having embraced baptism, having as a teenager stood your ground and accepted confirmation, having received Eucharist yesterday or last week, or this morning. You'd like to think that now you have it. Maybe even more importantly, you wish now that your spouse got it. But these seasons, each of them, they're part of the journey. And to be seen in God's eyes as steps along the way, not the ending place. And he'll keep inviting us in different ways along the course of the seasons. I myself would like to have arrived, and yet God still has to invite me in different ways, not the final ways. It's not the last story yet, but to invite me to walk forward. And I wish that I had a parish full of people who got it, who completely understood, who had heard the charismatic proclamation of the Father's love, and that love transformed their entire lives, and we would walk together in harmony without worrying about who was most important or who was liked the best or who had the most important job, without thinking one weekend that maybe golf would be more interesting. But then Peter did go fishing. Right? Yeah, that would be nice. But the stories of the Gospels, maybe especially the story of Peter that we reflect on today, asks us to respect the seasons of our lives and other people's lives and to respond to the call as best we can in each season and to keep growing and developing through the seasons. That's something we can do as a parish community. That's something you can do in your families. It's something that your children will have to do through the seasons of life. It's something that I look forward to as time and time again an encounter with the Lord invites me to love. And I hope that one day my love might be a little bit more like Peter's at the end, a little bit more like Jesus's, a little bit more like